Welcome back, everyone, to our third and final session of today's HR Summit. We're delighted that we've had some fantastic panel discussions earlier today. The first one on leadership, the second one on talent acquisition and retention. And those have brought out some real key themes which nicely feed into this third session. Those themes really being the importance of purpose and sense of belonging, and of course, well-being and health, mental health, and the importance of that over these COVID times. This third session is going to focus on workplace well-being and mental health strategies. And in a moment, I'm just going to pass over to the moderator for this session. But before I do that, just a reminder that if you do have questions for any of the panelists, then please do put them in the chat facility on Zoom here, and we'll come to those questions at the tail end of the session. And just so everybody is aware, we are recording the session so that you can access this after the event should you wish to do so. So it's my great pleasure to welcome the panelists and to welcome the moderator, who is Joe Causon, who is the CEO of the Institute of Customer Service. Joe, it's my great pleasure to hand over to you, and I wish you a great conversation.
Thank you so much, Paul, and a warm welcome to everybody from me and the rest of the panel. How we're going to run this session, I appreciate it's the last session of the day, so thank you for sticking with us. And you know, you've got a brilliant panel actually, and it's such an important topic, so I really appreciate you spending the time with us. What we're going to do is I'm going to share a few thoughts, and then I'm going to get each of our panel to introduce themselves and to talk about why this is so important. We're just going to quickly go through this as a subject, but then I want to try and get into some meat of some of the questions that you have got. So this works much better, as Paul said, is if you put your questions onto chat, and I will try to facilitate as many of those. You know, nothing is off limits is a really important thing. And what I would say, given the world that we have all been through, given the tremendous job that you are doing day in and day out, this subject and looking after yourself and caring in the greatest sense has never, ever been more important. And a few stats, I guess, to support this. 34% of employees, this is Institute stats, have said that well-being in their organisation has got worse during COVID. 40% said that levels of anxiety have got worse. 20% of customers, this is quite important too, have stopped using an organisation because it does not treat its employees fairly. So it's quite interesting in terms of customers now actually picking up on this important aspect. 56% said that in the last year, they had spoken to customer service employee who was working from home and they were worried about them. So concerns about the well-being of them. About 20% of people are saying that they prefer hybrid working into the mix here about workplace and workplace being. But actually, number one about that was looking after my well-being. And we've just done a big piece of research around this in terms of the future of work and the workplace. And there's a big, big focus on ensuring that mental health and well-being is absolutely up there, both from a customer viewpoint, but also an employee viewpoint. So there's a lot to go for, I think, this afternoon. And I would really encourage you, as I've said, to definitely put your questions on the chat, and we will pick those up. But let's start off. Una, I'm going to get you to introduce yourself. You're no stranger to these sessions. You're always brilliant. But tell us a little bit about your job and why this subject is so important to you.
Thanks, Joe. Hi, everyone. I'm super excited to be with you online and can't wait, hopefully, to be there in person next year. My name is Una Riley. I work for a company called Unibail-Rodamco-Westfield, known as Westfield in London, UK. Business is shopping centre, construction, property, and retail Bulletin. I'm so proud to be here. I've worked in retail since I've been 16, all the way through uni, and retail is very close to my heart. And I now, as a guest, is working for a traditional landlord, very much touching upon retailers every day. I look after HR from a director point of view, an operational point of view for the UK. parts of Europe, and very happy and very honoured to look after engagement for the group, so the US, the UK and Europe, with a specific focus on engagement, well-being, inclusion, diversity. Joe, as you said, well-being is always so important, but I think the last 18 months has become part of the top people agenda. And I'm so honoured that we finished with such the important area of well-being, because it touches every single part of our people agenda. So honoured to be here, honoured to be sitting on a panel with great experts, and looking forward to answering lots of interesting questions on well-being.
Brilliant. Una, can't wait to hear from you. I know that you will have so much to add, and as you said, a lifetime in this sector too, so some real expertise and experience. Claire, a warm welcome to you. Introduce yourself, Claire, and tell us why you're so passionate about this subject area.
Hi, well, thanks, Joe. I mean, yeah, delighted to be here. I've been working in health and wellbeing for quite some time, longer than I'd like to say. Recently, I've been working as a health and wellbeing consultant. Prior to that, I was working as a head of health and wellbeing for a construction firm. But I have worked in retail for 10 years, so I've got quite a bit of experience working in retail. So I think Una's absolutely right that, you know, the last couple of years has really brought well-being to the forefront, but it's always been so important. And Robertson Group have got this, they define well-being as being able to feeling good and functioning well. And I think that says it all. It's, you know, if you're not feeling good, then you're not functioning well. And that impacts on your work and then subsequently, obviously, in your home life as well. So, yeah, it's so important. And I think that's now being, you know, people are finally realising that's the case.
Yeah, it's been talked about a lot more, isn't it? I think that, you know, that which has obviously got to be a great thing, Claire. And I guess, given your span, you've worked across lots of different industry sectors. It'll be really interesting to bring that perspective in as we get going, and what we can learn from outside the sector as well. So I know you'll have a huge value to add. So a warm welcome, Claire.
Thank you.
And Emily, a warm welcome.
Hi, so I'm Emily Scammell. I'm the Director of Internal Comms and Employee Engagement for Improbable, which is a virtual worlds company. We look to kind of create these virtual experiences, whether that be in gaming or kind of large scale events or kind of any other immersive type experience. And it's become even more relevant in the kind of post COVID world as we get together virtually in situations like this. Wellbeing is a hugely kind of emotive subject, and something that I think businesses have kind of woken up to the impact of, certainly since COVID and the pandemic has kind of had such a massive impact on the business world. It's something that we take incredibly seriously at Improbable, and I don't think I've ever worked anywhere that talks about mental health and well-being so openly. You know, our leadership are happy to talk about their, you know, where their headspace is at the moment, what they do to look after their own well-being and mental health, practice self-care, and it's hugely important, and it's something I partner with our kind of people team on in helping, you know, everybody feel comfortable with looking after themselves and thinking about themselves within the business.
Brilliant. And Emily, I know I'm going to really come to you and probably get to draw out quite a bit about at senior leadership level too, because you know, given the fact that we're trying to drive that across the organisation, it's really important that the senior leadership are also practicing what they preach too.
100%.
And as a sector, it's a pretty full-on sector, isn't it? And you know, it doesn't exactly sleep. So there's some quite big challenges about making sure that we really do look after each other in the retail sector.
Absolutely. I think actually, you know, retail and every other sector really needs to kind of wake up to this subject. It's you know, the idea of hybrid working, the idea of kind of potentially never really being offline and always being available means that the potential for burnout is so huge. And yeah, role modeling from the top is so important and so impactful in terms of you know, it being okay not to be okay, and it being okay for you to kind of focus on your self-care.
Absolutely. Emily, real pleasure. I'm sure we're going to get into loads of those topics as we go through the time we've got together. And Robert, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you're interested in this subject to?
Brilliant. Yeah, thank you very much. And thank you very much for the opportunity to join today's panel. I'm here from Softworks, and Softworks are one of the sponsors for today's event. Softworks specialise in workforce management technology, so providing you with solutions to pretty much everything that's probably been discussed today and certainly on today's panel. What really interests me about this session, so around wellbeing and employee engagement, we've actually said quite recently as well that we believe this should be the #1 priority for employers at the moment. I think it was the former CEO of Campbell Soup that actually said to win in the marketplace, you must first win in the workplace. And I don't think there's ever been a more relevant time for that particular comment.
Absolutely, Robert. I mean, given the shortages that we're facing, given the demands that we're placing on our people at the moment, I think this is probably even more heightened. And it's certainly what I see, you know, to your point, from the customer viewpoint, there's quite a lot of pressure coming down from that angle as well. So absolutely, having an honest and open dialogue and debate has never been more important given the landscape. And that landscape's not going to get any easier in the short to medium term. So looking after our people is critical. So as a reminder, please pop your questions on the chat, and I will definitely make sure they put them through. What usually happens is everyone leaves it, and then the last 10 minutes we try to get through 150 questions. So don't leave it, guys. Do me a favour and make my life a lot easier and get on the chat early doors. But without further ado, let's get into this a bit more. So Una, huge amount of experience, you know, some quite significant challenges. So how, you know, what's your advice if you're going to, you know, to really address these challenges? You know, what's your top tips in terms of we're facing into this? I've not got, say, for example, a really clear, coherent strategy around this. What would I do and where would I go to try and drive that, taking that forward?
Great question, Joe. I think this back to 2 years ago, where most organizations had a wellbeing framework, a wellbeing reference. I know we did in Unibail-Rodamco-Westfield. We had a beautiful presentation, beautiful strategy that probably said all the right things, focus on mental health, wellbeing, healthy minds, culture, and body. And we did a lot of training. You know, I worked really closely. Actually, Linda, my colleague, is on this. She looks after global learning and development, and we talked about putting things in place. And then we very quickly went into COVID, an unknown area, and we had to go right back to the drawing boards and said, forget about the beautiful framework. What do we need to do to make sure our people are healthy and well? So we very much applied a simple strategy. We listened, we learned from our people, and then we tried to live it. So what did it mean to get up and to feed your children, to feed your dog, to get dressed and sit at the kitchen table and try to homeschool, try to manage emails, try to manage everything? There was no textbook to tell us what to do. There was no textbook as a leader to say, this is how you do it. So it was very much connecting, caring, and communicating. Yes, we put frameworks in place. So we offered, because we're all different, and I think sitting at our kitchen table, we realized how different we are, but also how similar we are. So we put in webinars, working with our academy, which we have a very strong learning academy in Unibail-Rodamco-Westfield, saying what courses do we need to put in to help people understand what to do. We worked with specialists, so worked with a number of organizations, and I went through the mental health first aid training to see if this is something, and all our leadership team in the UK also attended this. So they really understood that it's not just, you know, having a certificate, it's the importance of our employees knowing that 20% of their other colleagues are trained mental health first aiders. Then we looked at our, advice, looking at redoing policies, procedures. Flexi working was not just a nice to have, it was a necessity, because as a mother, I had to do certain things in the morning and I was doing emails in the afternoon or last thing at night. So we had to apply flexibility throughout and offered to all of our employees, putting in lots of things such as no emails on a Friday. We thought we were doing a great thing, but actually we spoke to our people, we learned, and by putting something in place, which in a normal environment would have been seen as great, actually was something that was not so good, because in that period of time, maybe that was the only time my colleagues could do email. So just that flexibility and saying it's okay to get things raw as long as we listen and try and support. And it's okay to say, I am so not okay. As a HR leader, I should have all the answers, but I don't actually know what to do. So working, I don't think I worked as much with any of my colleagues across Europe, across the globe. Linda, or let's say the global expert in training and development, we worked through getting the right offering in place. But the most important thing was talking to our people and encouraging them to talk to each other and talk to us. So having chat mornings over virtuals, having chat lunches, and just being available for everyone. So,
and I'm going to come back to you because I want to make sure and I really understand how you maintain that in a hybrid world, because I think absolutely there were lots of really good things and lots of brilliant initiatives that happened during lockdown, and pretty much every organisation I talked to, really used things like coffee mornings or chat-ins or drop-ins or all of those sorts of things. But as we go forward, making sure that we keep a lens on this is going to be even more important and potentially quite difficult in given a hybrid or that kind of aspect. So let's come back to that. I'm also delighted. So thank you, Malcolm. You've taken me at my word and you've got your first question in. So I'm not going to forget you, Malcolm. I will come back to that. But I just want to quickly go to Claire and ask Claire in terms of in terms of this network and this framework, what are the top 3 things, we're going to keep it, that you think really help to drive this, that you would be saying to this audience we absolutely need to do in terms of making sure that we keep wellbeing up there?
Oh, and well, it absolutely has to start with the leadership. We were talking about the importance of leadership earlier, and absolutely, they have to be buying into it, understanding it, walking the talk. So whether they need any upskilling, line managers need some training in mental health or emotional intelligence, because and one of the things that's been so important is having those conversations around mental health. And I think there's some reticence sometimes with line managers saying, oh, I'm not an expert in psychology, I can't be having that conversation. Yes, you can, and so definitely upskilling the line managers so that they feel confident just asking those questions about how are you feeling, are you okay, and that sort of thing, I think has been really important. And having I'll probably talk about this a lot, but the culture, having a culture where there is trust and support and flexibility, and not having a culture, say, of bullying or a culture of working long hours or something like that. Really important.
And keeping on top of that and keeping it very present in the boardroom and the discussions and all the team meetings and things like that, Claire.
Yes.
Very, very clear in terms of the role of leadership. Emily, for you, in terms of what's been the kind of key things about an effective wellbeing strategy and deploying that?
I think for us, we're always thinking about the barriers to the behaviour that we're trying to influence. So from a kind of management, from a leadership perspective, what's stopping them having these conversations with their teams? And often it's because they don't want to appear that they don't know the answer. They don't want to say, oh my God, you're talking to me about mental health and I am now panicking inside because I have no idea what to say. It was about providing them with a kind of framework to have those types of conversations, and actually making it okay not to have all the answers. They're never going to be experts in this space, and making them comfortable with not being the experts. I think was kind of one of the key elements for us. And that meant making them fully aware of all of the support that was there, and that having these conversations and being able to highlight what support was available to their people, that made the difference to kind of having these conversations internally. Yeah.
On that, Emily, I'm really interested, because I think you've really hit something quite important here, which is sometimes the fear about not wanting to have it's not about not wanting to have the conversation, it's about the fear of having the conversation, or sometimes about getting it wrong and making it worse. You know, so how would you encourage people so that they don't feel like, because, you know, this is, sometimes people feel like they're prying, some people feel like they're on a very sensitive area. So how do you coach people to be okay to start having those conversations? Because I certainly see that, you know, someone being a bit hesitant. You know, I wanted to reach out, but I wasn't sure how to. You know, how do we encourage that?
There's so many subjects in the workplace that could end up being difficult, that could be a bit scary to talk about. You know, diversity and inclusion being one of those things as well. And I think what we've tried to kind of bring up with managers and highlight to managers is that it's just, you don't need to say, right, well, let's have a well-being conversation, you know, or let me check in on your mental health. Yes. You know, it's more about building the rapport with the people that work with you, and having a general kind of chat, you know, and if at some point during that conversation it becomes clear that that person is struggling, or that it's appropriate to start asking, are you okay? Then, you know, it becomes more of a natural conversation, as opposed to, you know, let's sit down, book an hour in the diary and have this really difficult conversation that neither of us really wants to have. And actually, I think that's been the biggest point, in the, you know, in the same way as I don't want somebody to sit down and have a feedback conversation. I just want people to have, you know, have chats, you know, build a rapport with the people that they work with and for. I think that's kind of changed the thought process around having those kind of conversations.
And I think you're absolutely spot on. I mean, what I'm kind of thinking of is what hybrid and what working from home and all some of those things have given to us is we're a bit more human. So we feel a bit more, hopefully, relaxed and more prepared to have more honest conversations. But you're right, this is not about starting and having a tick box. Have I asked about the well-being of Emily today? You know, that's not what you're talking about here. You're talking about just generally having a better overview of your people and how you engage with them, and just spotting if Jo doesn't seem her normal self, and just checking in and having that as a normal routine part of the conversation. Really,
I think, sorry if I just chipping in there, but I think it is so important that you know your team, you know, the line managers, that they know who may be struggling and who struggles with what, and you know, it's so they will notice if somebody's not their normal selves, or you know, and that will just prompt the natural, you know, like Emily was saying, you know, having that rapport, it would just prompt that natural flow of conversation rather than making it this sort of big, fearful well-being conversation. So.
Yeah. Now, I'm going to bring in Robert as well into this, but just before I do, there's a question actually that I'm going to ask to all of you, and we'll come back, Malcolm, I promise you, to your question. But, you know, this is about getting buy-in. So how does HR get buy-in at board level for implementing a well-being strategy? Great question. So, you know, Una, your top tips on how you get buy-in from the board.
I think really getting them to understand what well-being is in terms of mental well-being, physical well-being. I'm very lucky at Unibail-Rodamco-Westfield. I have a CEO who talks, you know, in his opening presentation in January, talked about trust and togetherness, and you talked about culture. It's like creating a healthy culture. And I think well-being is very much part of our culture, it's part of our values. We don't have well-being, but it's part of, in terms of teamwork, excellence, passion, looking after each other. And we started a thing, but we actually started about a year ago. So apologies if everyone here has been doing it for years. It's just that check-in. So we speak to a lot of people in lots of different countries, and one of the things that we were talking about is checking in that they're okay. So rather than saying, can I check in on your well-being, it's like 5 minutes, very cool, how's things? Because I may be speaking to somebody in Poland and their entire world's just been closed down, whilst my world may have been opened up. So I think our board and the table very much understand that without our people and without checking in and without knowing that they're okay, we can't have that business conversation. We can't talk about, you know, return on investment or customers or footfall, because if our people are just not in the right headspace because something's happened at their kitchen table or someone's got very ill or worse, is, you know, it's that constant check-in. So I think it was reminding everyone that we're all human, and actually for once not putting a sterling figure on a well-being training course, and not putting a financial return on investment for mental health training. It was just that this is a basic human need that we need to support our people, and it doesn't always have to have a financial figure at the end.
See, that's really interesting, Una, and to your point, that is brilliant. If I was slightly pushing on this, if you have a board that understands this, if you have a CEO who is leading from the very top and really gets it. If you don't, you know, and sadly there are still some organisations that perhaps are not as up on this as we would expect, then, you know, I think, how do we help them with that is quite an important question. And actually one of Malcolm's question was about the return on investment, you know, being able to prove the investment of wellbeing initiatives. So I agree with you that the best organisations to work for are those that get this and intrinsically care about it. And I think slowly most boards are getting better at understanding the importance of the employee and the engagement of that. But in terms of wellbeing, how do we, you know, what could we take to the boardroom? What could HR take to the boardroom that really helps to nail some of these things? Because it's obvious to us, isn't it? Because hopefully we're all caring about it. But Claire, what have you seen that, you know, that would really help somebody in HR to convince the board if they're not on board, as it were?
I think it really helps with recruitment and retention, you know, and that's so crucial right now. It really does. People are looking more and more for, does this organisation look after your well-being? It's something, especially now the younger generations coming up as well, that's something they're just looking for and assuming will be in place. So if you don't have that, then, you know, I think that, and sustainability is the word as well, isn't it? And they're very linked in, wellbeing and sustainability. So yeah, I think it certainly helps as recruitment of talent.
So this kind of message is linked, isn't it, to Malcolm's question around one of the ROIs is being able to demonstrate that actually you're more able to recruit the better people that you might need to do in your business, and you're much more likely to retain them, which at the moment is probably the number one issue on pretty much every CEO and boardroom's agenda in terms of retention. So a really good kind of link there about actually we need to attract this. Emily, your thoughts on persuading the board?
I think it's probably it's quantifying the problem, and if there is a problem. So I'm a massive fan of data, and if you can take a kind of a story to the board, to talk to them, to the exec team, to talk to them about, you know, this is the issue and this is what we believe is going to make the difference. But there's also this piece around, we don't want to always be curing the problem, we also want to be preventing it as well. So if we can start providing them with external data points that help them to understand the impact of having you know, brought in activities surrounding the kind of the well-being topic. And also I'm not really a fan of initiatives or kind of, you know, bringing in a tool or a training program. For me, it's about kind of having a holistic approach, and you know, not everything costs money either. So it's not always about saying, right, I want to spend £1 million on this, you know, massive platform. You know, it's about maybe taking baby steps with a board that maybe are a bit more reticent about a kind of investing an awful lot in this area. If you can kind of show some wins that impact some of your data, then you've got more of a kind of platform to stand on to talk about this stuff. And I think that's hugely important. It's not trying to kind of boil the ocean in one go. When I was working for Kantar, a huge organisation, 30,000 people, one of my massive learnings was that if I was rolling out an engagement initiative, I wasn't going to do it to the entire world. I was going to maybe pick an office, pick a country, go and kind of prove my worth, you know, have a story to tell off the back of that, and then go where the doors open. So kind of then roll that out to different areas so that you know, I can continue to say, well, this had this amazing impact, XYZ, you know, numbers have got better. And speaking to kind of what Claire said around retention of talents, around kind of sickness, you know, can your employee engagement survey, can you ask questions around this topic? Can you start pulling out data from internal sources in this? You know, even such things as kind of simple things like on Slack or Workplace by Facebook platforms, you know, polling, and ask the management community, you know, any kind of data that you can take to kind of tell the story and kind of pad out your argument is going to provide you, you know, with the best platform to work from.
I completely agree with everything you've said, Emily. And I think also, and I know we're going to talk about this, about prevention is better than cure. So even if you added up the number of the sick days that we have got because of increased anxiety, if we added up the retention and recruitment, productivity is a major issue. So it may not be about the cost of actually, it's about the cost of not doing these things. And I think that's another part of this. So there's a definite productivity. And Robert, I'm going to bring you in here because obviously workforce planning, the ability to be able to really understand that. What have you taken from what you have learned in terms of helping to be able to provide the case to support this, you know, more fully?
Absolutely, yeah, and apologies if some of my points sort of contradict some of the things that have been said. I work in sales, so mine is very much about return on investment and figures. So a recent study done was actually done by Gallup, which is the state of global workplace. Was showing, and they basically did a sort of an engagement survey about the most engaged and the least engaged workforces across globally, and it was actually showing that businesses in the top quartile of their global engagement database are 17% more productive and 21% more profitable than those in the sort of the lower quartile. So you can see it can make a huge impact in terms of the numbers as well. And this isn't just around productivity, this is also around absenteeism. So by having an engaged workforce, you're going to reduce absenteeism, and there are lots of tools out there, and including our own, that you're able to obviously track and provide sort of return on investment figures against.
Okay, brilliant. So certainly some tools there. I'd also add into the mix, if this helps, around the link between customer satisfaction and employee engagement. So we know for every 1% increase in employee engagement, we get almost a 0.5 point increase in customer sat. And that then leads to the increases in terms of financial. So I think it's a mixture. I think the spirit of what Una is saying is that actually this matters more, so important. It's not about a number and not a financial number. Yeah. And I think it's about the whole general well-being. So your spirit of what you were talking about, Una, absolutely. And this is about an ongoing approach. It's not an initiative. This is how we should be running our businesses. I think all of the panel are definitely nodding their head to, in terms of, well, this is as important as health and safety or anything else that we do inside this organisation, to get the very best and to create the right environments. So Malcolm, I hope that helps, certainly around the ROI question, and also the balance of where we're spending time. You know, let's ask that, you know, how much time should we be spending on well-being and how much time should we spend on doing the job? Or are they both the same things? Which might be my question, because actually they're so entwined. You know, how do we actually kind of balance our time? But maybe we could talk a bit around prevention first. Yeah, Emily, go for it.
I was just going to speak to that last point, in that I think one of the challenges that we've had that we need to front up to, I think in any industry, is that we often promote people who are really good at their jobs into management positions. Firstly, we don't give them any training in terms of how to kind of take on pastoral management or management generally of their people. And we also expect them to continue doing the job that they were doing while also managing the people that they're managing. Now, I think this is a wider issue of which kind of having those well-being chats, those mental health chats kind of fits into, in that we need to be freeing up our managers to do more of the management of their people, the people management, and not expect them to still also be delivering quite as much on a day-to-day basis in a role. And I think the phrase the phrase that was used in the question was away from their day job. Now, managing their people is their day job, and it should be their day job. Now, this is something that leadership need to take into account in terms of workforce planning, because if we're expecting managers to take on the role of communicating effectively, of engaging their people, of looking after the well-being of their people, of kind of thinking about, recruitment and retention of talent, we can't also expect them to be delivering on XYZ objectives. So I think for me, it's a wider issue that we kind of need to all front up to, whatever industry you're in.
It's part of the day job. Robert, you wanted to add to that?
So yeah, I completely agree with everything that Emily has just said then, and I think that really is where a company like Softworks, so with smart technology, can really assist, because essentially what we're doing here is we're putting too many responsibilities, so something has to give. So by using smart technology, we can assist in all of those areas where we can automate a lot of those manual processes that are so time consuming at the moment. So by automating them out and by configuring around what it is specifically that you want automated, not just deciding for you what it is that you want. By doing that, we're going to reduce the amount of time spent on those areas, so you can focus on what it is that you really need to be focusing on, like you said there, managing your people.
Brilliant. Thank you, Robert. I'm going to move us on. Don't forget, put your questions on the chat, and please make sure that they're coming in, and I will put them. Una, let's talk a bit about, we touched on this hybrid, and we touched on different ways of engaging. So for you, what have you seen over your career that works really, really well in engaging the workforce more generally? Because this is obviously not just about workplace wellbeing and mental health, but it's the whole kind of thing. So what initiatives or what activities, shall we say, have you seen that you think are really good?
I think, like probably everyone, we have the engagement surveys. I use lots of data, but I use it as a check-in as opposed to a reason to. So I use it as a check-in in terms of to give me a flavour of where we are from engagement. So I think we've really focused, again, like I've done the last 2 years, the link between well-being, more in the on the physical and mental, but also on the cultural side of well-being in terms of having a healthy organization from a cultural behavior point of view. And then because I also look after the US engagement, is very much the just horrific events of the last year and a half in terms of the importance of inclusivity and diversity. So rather than, I think a few years ago, maybe I would have treated them as kind of separate parts of my role. For me, they're very much connected. So well-being, diversity, inclusion, in addition to, given reason, the environment, the work environment, given reasons for people to come to work back to work, and having a more flexible work hybrid environment. You don't need to be chained to your desk every day. To Emily's point in terms of if you're giving people more responsibility of people, then you need to reduce maybe the process or look at it. So I think it's throwing away the rule book, but kind of knowing what it says in the rule book and saying, how do we, the engagement strategy that I maybe implemented 5 years ago in a normal world doesn't actually hold true now, and kind of very much opening up that conversation of how I can engage people's hearts and minds going forward, and ideally keep them within our business, but equally keep them healthy, because Joe, thank you for picking up my spirit. I work for a company that we're all kind of suffering in the crisis, so we don't have loads of budgets, but I wouldn't work for a company who would not invest in people's well-being. and that,
you
I wouldn't
prioritise
work
that.
for I wouldn't work for a CEO if he or she had absolutely no interest in well-being. I would choose to work somewhere else. So.
Which directly goes to Claire's point earlier, that if you're not doing this, you're not picking up the best talent.
Totally.
So, if nothing else, even if you didn't believe, the really critical thing here is actually you do need to believe, because we've all got a responsibility for this, for our people, for each other and our organisations. But actually, if you don't really care about this, you won't have an organisation, because you won't have people that want to come and work for you. So it's a fundamental requirement, shall we say, in today's society. Right, Claire, I'm going to ask you about adaptability. Wow, we've gone through the last 18 months, 2 years, everything seems to be, full on. I don't know about you, but sometimes I feel a bit overwhelmed with everything I'm trying to learn, new tech, new ways of working, making sure I've got a really inclusive environment. How do we help people to adapt? Because that's what we're talking about, isn't it? We're trying to be a bit more comfortable, a bit more out there, a bit more relaxed. So what's your top tips?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, change is constant. Everybody knows that. There's always change. But wow, this last year or so, the amount of change and the speed of the change has just been massive. And yet people have adapted. It just shows, it is a natural skill that humans have on the whole, is that we do adapt to different climates and war zones and famines and what have you. But I think what really helps is something that's called adaptive attitudes, in that, firstly, people need to be aware that, how important it is to be able to adapt, to have an open mind, to be just we'll see how this goes, not to put up the blockers immediately, and to have a willingness to learn, so that you can upskill yourself, so that you're marketable. And this is where organizations can also help their employees, is to help them with upskilling, and so that they're ready to, they can move on if needs be. And then problem solving skills, resilience skills, and something called self-efficacy, which is a belief in your ability to cope, is really, really important. So yeah, I would say that they're the sort of, from an individual point of view, they're the skills an individual needs to have. What companies
tell us a bit more about that third skill, about believing. Talk us a bit more about that. Yes.
Yeah, it's just believing that you can cope. And I suppose it's sort of linked with self-confidence and what have you, but it's just having that inner belief that you will be able to cope. And that's where, companies who are running resilience sessions and things can really help people to foster that belief in themselves, that confidence that they can.
Yeah, and I think earlier, I think Emily, it was, or Una, the point about it's okay not to be okay as well. So, surfacing these things and actually being comfortable with having, I will get through it, but at the moment I might be finding I need to reach out. I need some help.
Absolutely. And that's so important, isn't it? And that's where, the thing at the moment people are talking about a lot is psychological safety. Yeah. Is having that environment that people feel they can speak up and they feel safe to say, I'm really struggling here. And absolutely, so that's so important, that people feel that they can speak up, and also that they know where to get support from. Companies organizations doing a lot of really good stuff around support, but sometimes you find the employees don't know that it's there, and if they know it's there, they don't know how to access it. So that's really important.
So signposting things properly. Yeah. Constantly talking about that, talking at all levels inside the organisation, checking in and wellbeing in many different forms. I think there was a really good point earlier on that Una made about, look, if people want that email on Friday, they email on Friday. It's not about guessing. You've got to ask. Yeah. You've got to ask what is important to your employees and make sure they're doing that. Don't forget to put your questions in. Sorry, Claire, cut across.
No, I was just going to say what's important and what helps one employee might not help another. People are all individuals.
So choice, and giving people the choice and different ways of learning as well. in the round is going to be a really important part of that. Can I believe it, guys? We're going to be into our last 15 minutes. So please do make sure that you pop your questions on the chat through to us, because we do want to make sure that we make this a useful session for everybody that is actually on the call. So Emily, let's just pick up on this in terms of, creating the right environment. And, and you talked about it before about prevention and aspects of that. What creates the right environment for this to make sure that this is, and culture? Tell us a bit more about that in your mind.
There's a few things probably that make sense to talk about here. The first is around removing the stigma associated with kind of not being okay. So something that we talked an awful lot about Improbable, and one of my colleagues who looks after our wellbeing activities internally is very passionate about this subject, is creating a level of trust, and it is kind of comes back to that psychological safety piece that Claire was talking about, and that means that our leadership kind of talk to the things that they struggle with. So, our CEO will talk about some of the challenges that he has had, quite openly. They'll rubber stamp some of the initiatives. They'll answer questions on this subject. We had a fantastic chat about burnout amongst our, extremely senior team, all talking about the way that they cope with this stuff and how they've managed this in their career, and making sure that culture of removing the stigma around even talking about this, even saying, look, I'm just not okay today. And even as a senior leader saying, look, I've taken the morning off because, this is a challenge to me this morning, or I'm struggling with this particular issue or whatever. And removing that stigma around all conversations is hugely important. And the other thing is about kind of mental fitness. And it's something that we've been thinking about recently more around the prevention and cure thing in the topic, in that it's so important for people to feel like it's okay for them to take a holiday day. It's all right for them to kind of take a day, to sort out life admin, so they're not worried about that, sorting out the application to their kids' school, or worrying about their dog going to the vet, or things that might be kind of clouding your mind, adding to the stress levels, adding to your stress bucket, and is not enabling you to do that. We also kind of make it part of every week in that we have a Wellbeing Wednesday slot that's in everybody's diaries, and it's okay to take a longer dog walk, or go to the gym, or even have a midday nap to help you kind of to deal with this kind of stuff. And it becomes more a part of the culture. And sorry, my daughter's just walked in. everyday life of hybrid working. So yeah, I think for me it's enabling people to practice self-care in a way before making it part of the culture that you can practice self-care before it starts to go wrong, before it starts to harm people's mental health and well-being, and making that part of normal conversation all the way through the organisation as well, that impacts the culture and makes it, reduces the stigma of talking about this full stop.
I think it's really interesting, Emily. I mean, what you're talking about is that this is just the way things are. So in the same way that you check in about how I'm feeling physically, you also check in terms of mental well-being. And is there stuff that's getting in the way, acknowledging that and dealing with that. And I think what is interesting, and all of you talked about this, is, whether you put in a session, regular sessions, 1 weekly sessions or whatever. It's quite interesting. In our organisation, we went through a big period of people putting in their diaries lunch. So they were taking lunch. Now that was kind of fine, except for the fact that some people don't want to eat lunch till 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So they didn't want to put in, and I said, look, it doesn't matter. It's about in your rhythm of the day, you just need to make sure that you find some time in that day to make sure that you are putting the right thing in for you. That could be at 4 o'clock dog walk. It could be at whatever it might be. It could be that, but having that break is really good. And Malcolm, you're back with us. Good. Don't ever say sorry. We're really pleased to see. there's a question here from Malcolm about data. The panel think is crucial to when you're taking a holistic view. So what are the key things, when you're looking at this, do you collect in terms of being able to put that strategy together? I'm going to start with you, Claire, because you talked about some data points, and then I'm going to go to Robert. So what data do you think you should, as an organisation, collect on wellbeing?
Oh gosh, well, there's the different strands of well-being, aren't there? The physical, mental, social, financial. Obviously, starting with the well-being survey and asking people generally how they're feeling and what's important to them. But then you could also gather well-being data from if you're running wellbeing medicals and that sort of thing. So from the physical side as well. And we had something called so it's the personal health score, which we would actually track people. So we'd asking them questions, obviously around their physical, we'd do the blood pressure and that sort of thing, but also asking around the mental health. And then we would do that again in 6 months' time or a year. So we could sort of measure that, see whether the activities and things we were running were actually having an impact.
Okay, and people comfortable to have that? You got to the stage in terms of people really comfortable to score themselves in terms of on a scoring mechanism of how
yeah,
they
it
were
wasn't
feeling?
Shared, so their score was personal. They kept their score. It wasn't absolutely not public knowledge.
But really interesting in terms of that sense of on a scale, how am I feeling, and that you collected that. Interesting. Robert, what about in terms of workforce planning? What sort of tools generally, not necessarily for Softworks, but generally, have you seen that are quite good in terms of being able to record metrics on any of wellbeing?
Yeah, I think well, if we look at the sort of the three sort of key elements that I would look out for. I mean, number one of those being absence management. I think absenteeism, I think I've mentioned it already, but I'll mention it again because it is really, really important. I think it's one of those key things. If we're seeing sort of any sort of trends around absences pop up, we know there's usually more to it than that. So looking at those trends, it's a bit of a red flag, and then we can look into it in more detail. That's the first one. Next is communication. So we're looking at how are we communicating, how are we engaging with those employees, especially when we're managing a much larger organisation. I know we were saying, like we earlier, I think someone said it's not about writing down or ticking a box, but I think it is important that when we have those conversations, we record it, so that we're able then to pick up where we've left off, and also we've got that data to sort of make sure that we're able to track that we're having those conversations, because they can quite easily get forgotten. And I think the last one is probably a little bit more different about sort of skills matching. So have we got the right people in the right roles? Because quite often you'll get around engagement, you can cause quite a lot of issues by having people doing the wrong roles. So just by asking that simple question of where do you see yourself, are people doing the roles that they are correctly skilled to be doing?
Okay, brilliant. Some good advice. Una, anything for you that you would add in terms of being able to the right measurements or the right data?
Yeah, I think some really good advice there. We then would just to add into that, so add into the wellbeing survey, the check-ins. We introduced something. We introduced, your point to Joe about when you have lunch. So we introduced kind of wellbeing days. So we said, it was really interesting. What reason? No, and please don't put a reason. Just book in a wellbeing couple of hours, wellbeing couple of days, and so we just check in. The frequency that people take it, not from an audit point of view, but just in terms of encouraging. So we introduced them, a year and a half ago. For the first 6 months, nobody took them. I was like, please. So you can put lots of good things into place, but then it's that almost that stigma of taking a wellbeing day, and now everyone's taking them. So it's putting things into place and then checking in that actually they're adding value. The wellbeing policies, you can have the best policies in the world, but if people don't take them up and use them, they just become words on a piece of paper. So it's making sure your policies become living and breathing, not beautifully laminated on a wall somewhere. Other data say, really use the data. We did a global wellbeing data, our engagements pulse survey, and was the it's really getting under the skin of data that you use. So the overall global wellbeing score was relatively healthy. But then when we broke it into countries and into departments, we had some very extreme outliers. So it's really just not taking data at face value and just kind of peeling it back. And just because the overall score that you put in the report might look great, you could have someone sitting, to Robert's point, that is really struggling in their role or their department, that the necessity of their workload means that actually they feel very unhealthy. Great policies, but if you're sitting on Saturday night finishing a report for a Monday morning board meeting, I'm not feeling the company's looking after my well-being. So it's that real whole, Malcolm, as you asked about the data, it's having that holistic approach and not just one measured data point, but getting all your data points and then getting them to tell a story and understanding the story they're telling you.
No, you've been really brilliant with that. And Emily, you certainly talked about that too, about the fact that data is helpful, but nothing actually stops or should stop a line manager or anybody checking in and looking at the general well-being of somebody and having that conversation. And we're all different. So sometimes, we'll respond differently to that. So data is critical, but also, frankly, the conversation is as important as anything, and it not being a tick box exercise. Right, great, I've asked Una today, is she okay? Good, she's fine, let's move on. It's a genuine kind of just how we do things around here. We just sort of keep an eye on our general well-being. We are in the last 5 minutes, so I'm going to ask us 2 things, because I was looking back to the list of what we should have covered in today's session, and as your moderator, I'm desperately trying to make sure that we do. So I want to cover off 2 points. Recognition. So what's the most effective recognition or way you recognise people inside your organisations that you would pass on? Because we're building for the future. We've done, people have been brilliant, so we want to keep that going. So recognition, and how do we re-energise? We've touched on this. We're all a bit tired, sometimes a little bit overwrought. So how do we keep those energy levels good? So any thoughts, first of all, on recognition? I'm going to check that out. Any top tips on recognition? Emily, what have you been doing for recognition of your people?
So I think I'm going to be honest. I don't think we always get that right at Improbable. I think it's a challenge to not pay lip service to kind of properly recognizing people. We do have a system. It's part of a performance management system. It enables kind of peer-to-peer shout outs, but I think there's much more that we can certainly do from a recognition perspective to highlight some of the great stuff that's going on across our business. I mean, we're kind of calling out great work in our kind of weekly town halls globally across the organisation. But I think the strategy around that definitely it could do with more work.
Work in progress. Work in progress. More to be done, Emily. That's the case for all of us, I should think, as well. Claire, anything for you of a recognition that you've seen across the time that's been really good?
It's so important. A thank you is so important, and sometimes that's all it takes is a thank you. But I mean, sometimes things like having a wellbeing day. You've been doing really good work. Your reward could be a wellbeing day, so you can take a day off to look after yourself, something like that.
Okay, yeah, taking time out to look after yourself. And Una or Robert, anything that you would say either for recognition or indeed re-energising? Robert, go first.
I think for recognition, you just got to be a little bit careful. I think because it can work as a double-edged sword. So what I mean by that is obviously making sure that we're spreading the love for everybody.
Fairness.
Yeah, exactly that.
Okay, yeah. And Una. Re-energising. I don't think there needs to be too much re-energising. I can see loads of re-energising going on in your organisation. But what's your top tips in terms of making sure we stay energetic?
For me, it's just being really authentic and true. And that sounds a bit HR-y. So I'll give you an example. This morning I had a data protection email or VC, and I thought, oh goodness, I'm dreading having this VC. So I just said, can we do it? Can we walk and talk? And this person is based in Brighton. And I basically walked around, I live in Ealing, so I walked around the streets of Ealing and then I found a park. And I actually sat having a very intensive meeting, but actually I said, I'm sitting in a park. And he said, oh my goodness, you sent an email on that a few weeks ago. You actually do that? I'm like, not enough. So kind of living and breathing and not having a fancy big policy, but just saying it's okay to take time out and sit in a park and have a board meeting.
But I think that's really interesting because you're not actually taking time out of the work
No,
either.
but
You're just working in a different way, a different space.
Yeah.
And I think that's fab. You know, that's a great opportunity of just not thinking about, and that's for me, one of the most important things about hybrid. It's not about, it's about the activity. It's not about the place. You can do that, you know, anywhere, but finding different ways and different ways of doing things are really important. Paul, I've been a rubbish chair. I've got 1 minute left, so I'm going to hand back to you. But can I just also say a really big thank you to all of the panel. It's absolutely great. You've all got so many different perspectives. We could have carried on, I know, for at least another hour. But so my gratitude for being so open, frankly, with all of your ideas. And thank you to everybody that stayed with us. I know sometimes it's quite hard, particularly after you've had a long day. So great session, great speakers. Thank you so much for having me as well.
Joe, thank you very much. You have been an amazing chair and hosted an incredible panel. It's been superb. I know everybody would have really enjoyed that and taken some real advice and guidance and thoughts away from that. So thank you for doing that so wonderfully. So thank you. And thank you to all
And a big
panelists.
shout out as well, Paul, for Malcolm. So yes, I'd second that, Karen. Great shout out. Thank you all. Go safely, Paul, to you.
Thank you, Joe. No, you've got to go. So we'll leave you to it. All I want to do is just summarize a few things from the day before we finally leave you. Look, from the 3 sessions that we've had, it's been a great day for over three sessions. The first one around leadership, what we took from that was all about sort of energized leadership. That doesn't mean hyperactive leadership. That means putting your energies in the right place. So, you know, doing the right things. And you know, really what we found from that as well is sort of doing your part, of course, putting D&I first and making sure that it is playing a major part through the leadership agenda. In the talent acquisition and retention discussion, we know it's tough. We know acquisition is really tough in the retail industry at the moment, but we actually worked out that it's okay to evolve what you're doing. Innovation's great, but we don't have to be radical. Choose what works, listen and adapt. And when it comes to retention and engagement, it feeds really nicely into the panel that we've just been listening to. Well-being is so important in all of that. People are asking for it. People are requiring it after what we've all been through. So let's listen, let's adapt. And I think on the well-being side, I'm not going to repeat everything that's just gone on there. It's been such a wonderful conversation, but Una summarized it in 3 words. This is my interpretation, by the way, and I don't want to belittle everything that's been said, but it summarized it for me. It's about connecting, caring, and communicating. And what a wonderful way, if you drill into those 3 areas, there's a well-being agenda in there. So thank you, Una, for offering those 3 words. We all have a lot of work to do in that space. But the fact that boardrooms are talking about it now and it's cascading from there and working from the shop floor upwards as well, that means it's fully being worked on and interpreted well. So it's a wonderful thing. So what a great day it's been. Thank you very much to everyone for joining us. And finally, thank you very much to our sponsors, DWF, Elucidat, and Softworks. You've been wonderful for supporting us again. And finally, next year, we are going to meet in person. So let's get back to central London. The date that we have is the 21st of September, so a little earlier than normal. And for those who regularly attend, it would be lovely to see you again. And any new faces, please come along and introduce yourselves. So 21st of September, get in the diary. And for today, we'll leave you. But thank you once again to all the panelists and everyone who's attended. Have a good evening. Stay safe. Thanks then.